Welcome to Hardcover Feedback. I'm Kelly Campos.
And I'm Brandy Smits.
We've got 3 new books for you today. First up, we have a fairy tale retold. Then we have a science fiction action book. And then a psychological thriller.
First up, we have Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire. Now, we have all heard the story of Cinderella, the beautiful child cast out to slave among the ashes. But what of her 2 stepsisters, the homely pair exiled into ignominy by the fame of their lovely sibling? What fate befell those untouched by beauty? And what curses accompanied Cinderella's looks?
Clara puts down the small hearth broom and suddenly, with a chuckle, dips her hands in the ashes. She smudges her cheeks and her forehead. I am no beauty anymore. I'm a simple kitchen girl, a cinder lass at home in my ashes and char. Don't do that, says Iris. It makes me shudder. Don't be the girl of ashes, not even in play. You're too good. Clara purses her lips. No, you are good, but what a simpleton. You don't even see that I'm merely looking after myself, as usual. Iris doesn't know if this is strictly true. Clara has been sad, bitterly severed from the possibilities of her life. But is she incapable of kindness? That would make her a sort of beautiful monster. Clara shrugs as if she can see those thoughts in Iris's face. She continues, I don't care if you're happy or not really. But if you're gone from the house, I'm the more secure in my kitchen, the more needed, the more private. Call me Cinderling, says Clara, standing up straighter behind her mask of ashes. Call me Ash Girl, Cinderella, I don't care. I am safe in the kitchen.
I love this version of Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, Cinderella, whatever you want to call it. It's just a great interpretation of it. And the best part, which I like about it, is that it takes place in Holland in the 17th century. Now, I'm 100% Dutch, okay? You don't hear much about, Holland or the Netherlands during that time. And it was such a cool insight into, something that I've never really heard of. The tulips are there. The windmills are there, ice skating on the frozen rivers, it's all there. And it's such an interesting way to look at Cinderella, because you just assume Cinderella takes place, in England. And
right.
It was just such a cool differential to do it this way.
It was definitely a different take on the story. Not only was the main character one of the ugly stepsisters, neither one of them were ugly.
No.
One was mentally challenged, or that's what I assumed from the telling of the story. And one was just normal. She was just plain. She wasn't ugly, and she wasn't even an ugly personality. She was a very nice and loving personality. It was the circumstances that turned into this story of Cinderella later. And in the way of the telling of the story, it's as if the grandparents have retold this story so many times and it changes into the story of Cinderella.
It's a game of telephone.
Exactly, a game of telephone, totally. But they also weave in the painting of the time, which Rembrandt and all those are mentioned. All these, and Van Gogh are very popular painters, which are mentioned in context in this story. They weave in some actual historical elements that really give it a nice flavor. And like you said, the touch that it's in Holland makes it a completely different retelling of Cinderella than we've ever heard before. Now, I have to mention that Gregory Maguire is, of course, the author of Wicked. And Wicked was his first novel, and this was his second. I personally had read this before I read Wicked. So I enjoyed this a lot. I enjoyed Wicked more, I believe, because I enjoyed that telling more. But both stories that he tells are twists on what you perceive as reality. What is ugly? What is beauty? What is evil? What is good? And he twists those around, because there is no black and white on beauty and ugly and evil and good. There is no black and white on that. It's all perception, what you know, how a person is forced to act in a certain set of situations, and they do things that they think are good and they think are right, and then they spin around, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's exactly what happens in this book and what happens in Wicked. And that's what I think is so intriguing about the way he retells these stories. And this one was definitely no exception for me.
Because it definitely, portrays it as you said, what is good, what is bad, what is beautiful, what is ugly. Because if you listen to Iris, who is the narrator of this story, she really is a more beautiful person inside. people like her more because she's funny, she's creative,
She's
intelligent. Whereas Clara is just pretty.
Right.
And she doesn't like people. She's never left the house. She was like basically held prisoner by her mother and was never allowed to leave. And it definitely affected her socially, where she doesn't know how to act to people.
Right.
And you kind of are always rooting for Ruth and Iris, and you're kind of like, Clara, just sit down. You know, you're done. And
and it's not that she's
happen.
a bad person either. She's not necessarily a bad person. She's just definitely not socially adept,
right?
Which is, like you said, her parents' fault. Her mother cloisters her, and she does not know how to interact with people. She has fantasy worlds. She thinks that she's a changeling, because why else would she be cloistered in this house? You know, so she makes up this fantasy world where she's not really human,
right?
And that definitely affects the way she acts in all this. But she is so outwardly beautiful that people can't help but be fascinated by her.
Just stop dead in their tracks when they see her.
Exactly. But Iris doesn't realize how intriguing she is, which I think is one of the things that I like about this story, is that people do like her. And she's constantly putting herself down, and they're like, look, you really have more going for you than you know.
Well, it's also the same thing. Her mother continually told her, you're plain, you're ugly, no one's gonna love you, no one's gonna like you, you're not pretty. And it's the complete opposite spectrum of how the parents, it's all about how you are raised and your self-perception of you based on your surroundings.
Exactly. And one thing I found interesting about the mother, again, without telling too much to give away points of the story, is although she tells Iris, you're ugly, you're stupid, or you're ugly but you're smart, you know, that's all you have. You'd better be good at this because you're not getting a man on your looks. You know, she tells her that all the time. But she really believes that Iris is so intelligent and so interesting as a person. She really believes that her daughter is going to snag that guy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that she's going to find somebody because of that. But the words that she says about her lack of beauty are the only words that Iris really hears. She doesn't hear the other words about you're so smart, you're so this. And I think that's interesting too, because we, especially girls, we do that a lot. We hear the words about beauty, and that's what we latch on to, because for some unknown reason, that's what we think is the most important in many ways.
Is the most important.
Right, but again, that's an unknown. Why does society think that? You know, we could go into lots of theories on why, you know, we evolved in whatever way and whatever, but that's what we latch on to, and that's so strange. But that's exactly what happens in real life, and it is exactly what happens in the book.
Even in the 17th century.
Even in the 17th century. Well, overall, Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire gets 3 stars for me. I definitely enjoyed it. I think this was a reread for me. I had read it years ago, and I thought it was just too intriguing to pass by, especially with Wicked being so popular right now. But if I had read it after Wicked, I may not have enjoyed it quite as much. But since I'd read it beforehand, it was 3 stars for me, and I think it's an enjoyable read for anybody.
See, I got to give it 2.5, and basically for the same reason you just said. I read Wicked first, and I really fell in love with it way before it was a musical. I read this years ago.
Right.
And I wasn't as impressed with this one as I was with Wicked. So I kind of, you know, I hate to compare, but I have to give it 2.5.
Right. You just end up doing that, even with all the Dutch references.
Of course.
All right, 2.5 from Brandy, 3 from me. We'll be back in a moment. There are plenty of books about people escaping from slavery, but very few are written by the person that actually escaped, and even fewer are as exciting as the story of William and Ellen Craft. Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, which is written by William Craft, is the story of how he and his wife escaped from Macon, Georgia, got all the way to England, and then had the audacity to move back to the U.S. Their plan was simple. Ellen, who was a tall woman who could pass for white, pretended to be a man, a white man, who was the master of William, who was her husband. Are you following this so far? They went all the way up north without anybody finding their plan out, and then went over to England. Now, this is a story that you don't hear very often. Excellent story. Please read something other than Martin Luther King for Black History Month, or something other than Harriet Tubman. This is very, very good story written in their own words. Check it out, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, The Escape of William and Ellen Craft from Slavery by William Craft. Welcome back. Next up, we have Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Once again, the Earth is under attack. Alien buggers are poised for a final assault. The survival of the human species depends upon a military genius who can defeat the buggers. But who? Ender Wiggin, brilliant, ruthless, cunning, a tactical and strategic genius, and a 6-year-old child. Ender Wiggin is recruited for military training by the world government. Ender's childhood ends the moment that he enters his new home, battle school. Among the elite recruits, Ender proves himself to be a genius among geniuses. In simulated war games, he excels. But is the pressure and loneliness taking its toll on Ender? Simulations are one thing, but how will Ender perform in real combat conditions? After all, battle school is just a game, isn't it?
All right, we'll read a little bit here.
And the mind game is designed to help shape them, help them find worlds they can be comfortable in. You don't get it, do you, Major Imbu? I don't want Ender being comfortable with the end of the world. Our business here is to not be comfortable with the end of the world. The end of the world as a game isn't necessarily the end of humanity in the Bugger Wars. It has a private meaning to Ender. Good, but what meaning? I don't know, sir. I'm not the kid. You ask him. Major Imbu, I'm asking you. There could be 1,000 meanings. Try one. You've been isolating the boy. Maybe he's wishing for the end of this world, the battle school. Maybe it's about the end of the world he grew up in with as a little boy, his home, coming here. Or maybe it's his way of coping with having broken up so many other kids here. Ender's a sensitive kid, you know, and he's done some pretty bad things to people's bodies. He might be wishing for the end of that world. Or none of the above. The mind game is a relationship between the child and the computer. Together they create stories. The stories are true in the sense that they reflect the reality of the child's life. That's all I know.
Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game.
Now, I have to say right now, to quote one of the teens that have, I've been told read this book, Ender's Game is intoxicating.
And it is. It
really
is. In many ways. First of all, this is the first in a series.
Right.
In many libraries, Ender's Game is held in the young adult section as well as the adult section, because the rest of the series is definitely not geared towards young adults. However, this first one has a young adult protagonist, main character, so it does appeal to young adults in that way, and plus he's growing up, and so many other things that we're going to touch on appeal to teenagers and just under, that make this a young adult book as well as an adult book. It's one of those classics. If you've never read it, you must read it. If you are at all interested in science fiction, if you like Star Wars, if you like Star Trek, if you just like the idea of science fiction, if you liked Jennifer Government, if you like video games,
that's very important.
Read this book, because it will hit you on so many different levels. Let's talk about the video games.
Okay. Well, I don't know as many people know this, but recently the military has been using video games to help train soldiers. Well, that's what they do in Ender's Game.
And he wrote this how many years ago?
Oh, in the 80s,
Quite a few.
I think. And
right.
It's just, it shows how video games are not just necessarily a form of entertainment. They can be used as a tool to train you how to, how to shoot things, how to think strategically, and all this other stuff. And it's, kind of frightening that, they're selling these to every kid, and, there are 6-year-olds nowadays that I bet could, with their knowledge of video games, can strategically plan a war. I mean,
I'm sure they could. I'm sure they could.
But I'm sure they could.
Yeah, and that's, the games are kind of the linchpin of the story. Ender goes to this battle school, and they're playing these games, these war games, that are strategic tests to see if you and your team can beat the other team, can get to the other team's goal, can annihilate more of the other team. And they wear these splash suits where with these light guns, if they hit a part of the flash suit, then that part of the suit gets rigid.
Freezes.
Right, freezes, and they can't use that part of the suit anymore. If they get a body blow, then their whole body goes rigid, and they're just floating in space, because all of this game takes place in the center of Battle School, which has no gravity. And first of all, it sounds like a super fun game. Like, I would love to do that game.
It's like weightless laser tag.
Right,
It's
exactly,
so cool.
exactly. One major thing that Ender does that nobody else can do at the point that he comes in is when you enter this game, the war game, you enter from a corridor which has gravity, and then all of a sudden you're in a weightless environment. And everybody tends to think up, down, the way you came from that corridor. And Ender comes in and he's like, no, down is wherever the enemy comes from, and I'm gonna just fall and shoot at the enemy, and all they have to shoot at is my feet, which is a very small target. He's a 6-year-old kid, and he's like, why doesn't anybody else think of this? Hello, you know?
It's the same thing with everyone's always doing these, you know, strategic battle, you know, tactics of groupings, and, you know, this tune goes here, this one goes here, and he's like, you know, why, you don't have to do that.
Right, you can bounce off the wall and shoot this way and hide behind this, and it's almost like guerrilla warfare. It's like everybody else is the redcoats, and Ender is one of the Native Americans just coming behind lines and just doing stuff.
I was just gonna say, like, you know, in the Revolutionary War, it was like people just lining up and then shooting. Whereas if you look at like the Vietnam War, it's, you know, there are no, you know, lines. Everyone's just crawling all over the place. And
Right,
it's the difference showing that these kids were taught one way, but it's not as effective as it could be.
Right. If you don't learn to do this, what can you come up with? And that's
Right.
what they want to learn from Ender, is what can he come up with? Because he has a brain that they believe can solve their problem, which is end this war. And we have another problem of this is such a great payoff with this book, and it continues through so many series. I just don't even want to get too deep into the plot because I don't want to give anything away, because I think if I had known any of the points, then I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if it wasn't a surprise. And I really just don't want to get too far into it. But it's such an intriguing concept with the video games, with the war going on, with the alien buggers who they came to Earth once and there was hand-to-hand combat, and then they came back again and the Earth defeated them, and the Earth is afraid that they're coming back a third time. And that is where Ender is. They want to have a group of military people ready for when the buggers come again. And that's who they're grooming these battle school kids for.
Right.
So, so all in all, Ender's Game, I believe I'm giving this 3 stars. It was a very, very good book, one that I've always enjoyed, and it crosses genres and it crosses interest levels from teenagers all the way up to senior citizens, I believe, because it's such an intriguing concept.
And I have to give this one 3.5. It's one of, you know, now that I've read it, one of my favorites. I want to tell everybody to read it, and, you know, one of those, it can cross lines. It can cross, you know, age lines, because it's something that is you can relate to as an adult, but with the main character as a child, it brings it all full circle.
Totally agree. All right, 3 and 3.5, close vote. It's Ender's Game. We'll be back in a minute. Nonfiction is often seen as uninteresting. This is one nonfiction book that I think is extremely interesting. It focuses on the mythology around all corners of the world and the parallels that are there. In fact, the book is called Parallel Myths by J.F. Bierlein. It looks at the way the flood myths around the world are similar and yet different. From Europe to Native America to China, Africa, and every place in between, Egyptian mythology. It looks at the heroes' stories, it looks at the creation myths, and it shows you the similarities that are very striking in the way they popped up at the same time when there were no connections between these disparate portions of the world. So if you're at all interested in mythology, this is a very interesting book to check out with some little red myths. Parallel Myths by J.F. Bierlein.
Welcome back.
Our last book today is The Mentor by Sebastian Stuart. Charles Davis was widely popular with his first novel about the Vietnam War that he wrote as a fresh young college grad. But now in his early 50s, he has to rely on the income of his highly successful wife, Ann Turner. After the failing of his most recent book, Ann hires Emma as an assistant for her husband to help him get back on track. Ann gets suspicious when Emma turns out to be more than just an inspiration, and Charles and Ann's lives are changed forever.
It's the anonymity that comforts Emma most, the sense that she can move about unnoticed, released at last from the scrutiny of evil minds. She's free. Her destiny might be waiting just up ahead, around the next corner. She looks around her at the teeming avenue and feels as if she's where she belongs, in this city where she has no past, where nobody knows. Hello. Emma turns. A woman wearing a dark business suit takes her wrist. Emma tries to pull away, but the woman holds fast. I know you, the woman says, tilting her head and examining Emma with huge brown eyes. Emma notices the suit has a food stain on it, and the collar is frayed. She shudders and tries to pull away. The woman tightens her grip. Emma looks around wildly. No one is paying any attention. People are walking so quickly. I know you. Don't pretend you don't know me. Let go, please. Why should I? I know you. The woman twists Emma's wrists. Then Emma shoves her hard. Just shoves that filthy, horrible woman back hard. And it's the last thing the woman is expecting, and her mouth flies open in shock, and she lets go of Emma's wrists and loses her balance and falls down on the sidewalk. Emma wants to bring her foot up under that filthy chin and kick that jaw shut and teach that woman to go around grabbing people who are minding their own business. She wants to hurt her. Emma is frightened by what she wants.
Okay.
The Mentor. Well, The Mentor is about Charles. Chuck was a different show. About Charles, who is a writer who is now failing after having had such a breakout novel his first novel, and people expected so much of him, and now he's not doing too great.
Well, it goes also hand in hand with the fact that people seem to want different things.
Right.
The main bestsellers are these little cute girls in their little cute clothes, right, and these little floofy, drippy, no depth stories, and he just can't compete with that.
Exactly. Basically, his circuit is more cerebral, tightly written prose, and things like that. And what's popular in his world is Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants type of novel.
Exactly.
Teen novels about girls and romance and all this kind of thing. And he absolutely despises them. And he will not write anything like that. But he also can't write his next great American novel. He just has not been able to do it. And that has disrupted his marriage a bit because his wife is very successful in her career. And she's basically supporting them at this point. So she hires this girl, Emma, who was a temp in her agency, to come help out her husband for a little while, clean up his office so he can get his brain straight. And therein lies all the trouble that ensues. It was a very soap opera style novel. Everything, to me anyway, was kind of predictable. You had a feeling, oh, this is probably going to happen. Yep, there it is. And this is probably, oh, yep, there it is. There was only one point, which I won't say what it was, but there was only one point in the novel where I was like, oh, this is going to, oh, that didn't happen. Oh, wait, yeah,
there it did.
It just happened 2 pages later. So it wasn't really a surprise.
No.
None of it was. It was, for me, it was a travel book.
Yeah, it was a quick read.
It was definitely a quick read. I would read it on a train or an airplane going somewhere where you don't have to invest any emotional energy into the book that you read for travel purposes.
It's not one to make you think.
Right.
It's entertaining for what it is, but it's like, one of those movies that you go and see that you just, fills up space.
Right.
Where you know what's going to happen. You just went to see it because you were bored.
Right, yeah.
And that's kind of like what this book is.
Right. I think if the characters had been more richly drawn.
Yeah, they're really bland.
They were very bland to me as well. And if they had been a little more richly drawn, then the story may have been a little bit more enjoyable, because it wasn't a bad story.
No.
It wasn't a bad plot. It just was predictable. And I think the thinness of the characters added to that. We referenced soap operas, but honestly, One Life to Live and Days of Our Lives have thicker characters than this novel did.
It definitely could have just transferred right from that.
Yeah, yeah. So all in all, The Mentor for me only is receiving 2 stars, and that's being a little bit generous from me because, like I said, I would enjoy it for a travel read because I don't like to read anything that I'm going to want to read when I get to my destination.
Right.
Because I want to enjoy my destination. So it's one of the things you read it on the plane, in the car on the way there, on the car on the way back. That's pretty much it for me.
I'm not as generous.
Okay.
I give it 1.5. I was happy when it was done.
Gotcha.
I really, I wanted to see how it ended, but I really didn't care.
Yeah.
And,
I think that was the main point, that you didn't. I did care about the wife a little bit.
Yeah.
She was the only character that I cared about at all. And honestly, I think that's because she was the only one who really had any sense. I wouldn't say depth because she wasn't any deeper than anybody else.
Flat.
But she's the only one who had any kind of normal common sense to
Right.
me. So she's the only one I cared about in any way, shape, or form. And her story wrapped up pretty easily.
Yeah.
Pretty cut and dry. So I would agree. So 1.5 from Brandy, 2 stars from me. And I think it's time to wrap up. Yep. Let's recap. First up, we had Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister by Gregory Maguire. Brandy gave it 2.5 stars. I gave it 3. Second, we had Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Brandy gave it 3.5 stars. I gave it 3. And last, we have The Mentor by Sebastian Stuart. Thank you.
No problem.
Brandy gave it 1.5 stars, and I gave it 2. That's it for the show today. Remember, you can always check these books out at the library, or you can pick them up at your local bookstore, and we will see you next time.